Welcome back to the S&T Football Podcast. Today we got an interesting topic that I know me and Cezanne could easily make a 3-hour video on. So we're going to try and contain it a little bit here. But today we're going to be talking about Notre Dame football and our prediction for their season. I mean, looking at their schedule, my first impression is I think people are overestimating Notre Dame easily making the playoff. But without further ado, Cezanne, take it away.
Thank you very much, Tom. Yes, let's talk about the Notre Dame Fighting Irish and our previews and predictions for this upcoming 2026 season. So, just a recap of last year. Of course, Notre Dame was at the center of a lot of controversy towards the end of the season when the playoff teams were selected by the College Football Playoff Committee. Now, Notre Dame, even though they had a solid season last year going 10-2, and two of those losses were, you could say, very close losses. Could have went either way. Last year they played Miami, and in that game, Miami barely won on, I believe, the last possession of the game. Trying to pull up the score here, 27-24 in Week 1 last year. Notre Dame lost on the road at Miami, put up a great fight, but just came up a little bit short. And then not the very next week, but 2 weeks later, against Texas A&M, also on the road. They came up short by 1 point in overtime. And those were two heartbreaking losses for the Fighting Irish last year. And eventually, even though they won all 10 of their other games, it ended up being the reason why they missed out on the playoff. 10-2, and it was up between them and Miami. And of course, Miami was, a whole nother story in itself, but Miami ended up making it to the finish line at 10-2 as well. The decision basically came down between those two, as well as Alabama was kind of in that conversation as well. So only two of those three teams could make it, and Alabama got the benefit of the doubt being in the SEC championship game and all, even though they lost. And Miami ended up getting the edge over Notre Dame, and it pretty much came down to that head-to-head tiebreaker that went back all the way to Week 1 when Miami won that game. So Notre Dame got the short end of the stick last year. Of course, they threw a fit, and we talked about that a lot in our episodes last season. The entire, program threw a fit, and they decided not to play in their bowl game. And then basically they forced College Football Playoff Committee to make their own special rule for the Fighting Irish. Like, sorry, we left you out last year. So this time, if you make it in the top 12, that means you're gonna make the playoff. Sorry. We know we gave your spot away to a team that actually has to compete in a conference and whatnot, and you lost to them. But we'll make a special rule for you, our little princess Notre Dame. So I won't get I won't get too far into that. You know how we feel about them. But this season, Notre Dame is looking to right those wrongs. Now I'm looking at their schedule here, and I will say that even though Notre Dame's schedule is usually it's a bunch of cupcakes, other than they'll play like one tough game against USC or against a Miami. But other than that, Notre Dame year to year their schedule is very weak, and that's one of their biggest gripes, and one of my biggest gripes I have against them is that they don't play anybody really. This year it's a little bit better. They still do have Purdue and Rice and Stanford and Michigan State and Boston College on their schedule. Yeah. But they do play BYU week 7 at BYU. That is going to be a tough game. Anybody who's ever played in Provo knows that playing at BYU, because they're basically like the Penn State's little brother. Like, they are the whiteout down there at Brigham Young. So that is always a tough place to play. And going on the road midway through the season, BYU is going to be a great team as well. They're going to be competing in the Big 12, trying to win the Big 12 conference championship over there. So BYU is going to be a problem. So I already see that as maybe a first loss for the Fighting Irish. Then a couple weeks later, they play Miami. They host them this year, but Miami is going to be an absolute dog this season, as anybody knows. They just made it to the Natty, and they're going to be even better than they were last year when they went 10-2. So a rematch, of course, Notre Dame's going to be looking for revenge, but I don't see that being easy sledding for them going to Miami in Week 10, by the way. This is not Week 1 like it was last year when, both teams are just getting started. This is going to be in Week 10 towards the end of the season when both of these teams are established. They're both going to have their expectations set already. And Miami, I predict, will be looking to be making the playoff, if not going undefeated this season, because we talked about it a little bit in our ACC episode. Miami has a very weak schedule this year themselves. So Miami's going to be coming into that game, 10-0, 9-0. So Notre Dame better watch out. Even at home, that's going to be a tough game. And then they host SMU week 12, which I believe is another interesting game for Notre Dame because SMU ain't no slouch either. They might not be as good as Miami, but I do have high hopes for SMU because I believe the conference championship this year for the ACC will be Miami versus SMU. So if both of those teams ended up being as good as I think they're going to be, SMU is not going to be a cakewalk either. So Notre Dame better watch out at home week 12. And then in the last week 13, they go on the road to Syracuse. And just ask Clemson how hard it could be playing at Syracuse. They've lost to them twice in recent years. So going to Syracuse, especially in the last week, because, let's just say Syracuse isn't very good. They have nothing else to play for but to ruin your season. So that's always dangerous. It doesn't matter if they're bad or not. And then let's just say they're like 5-6, sitting on the edge of making a bowl game. That's just extra motivation for them to take you down. So watch out going to Syracuse in that last week. So I do believe Notre Dame had. Oh, and then also week 9 going to Navy. I don't really think Navy's going to put up much of a fight. Navy's a good team for a group of 6 team, but usually when they run into the Notre Dames, they end up getting their ass handed to them. But also going to Navy. So I would say between BYU, Miami, SMU, and Syracuse, those 4 games, I could see 2 losses for sure. For sure. And that would match their record from last year. Now, will 10-2 be good enough to make it this season? Last year it wasn't. This year they have a special rule that's on their side. So, 10-2, as long as they finish in that top 12, they'll be fine. But if they don't finish in the top 12, you know the rest. Tom, let me know what you think about the Notre Dame Fighting Irish and their prediction for this season.
Well, so, just looking at week 1, they start off with Wisconsin. Now, Wisconsin's not like a world beater, great team, but they're going to be a good week 1 matchup for Notre Dame to kind of see where they're at for the season, in my opinion. And then, obviously, the next week they have Rice. That'll be a nice little cushion week, easy. It should be an easy win. Obviously, you never know, but I think that's an easy win. But depending on whether Wisconsin comes out and punches them in the mouth and then we have a close game week 1, Notre Dame might respond to that in a good way, which, I think if Wisconsin comes out and pops them in the mouth week 1, Notre Dame's probably going to have a better season than if Notre Dame just walks through Wisconsin. Obviously, they're going to walk through Rice. Now, the Michigan State game, you kind of looked over Michigan State, but let's not forget Pat Fitzgerald is a true blue Big Ten coach. He knows how to play in the Big Ten. He's at Michigan State now, so he's probably a little bit better recruiting. I think Pat Fitzgerald is going to be a problem for certain teams. I think Michigan State's going to be a week-to-week ball club. I think they're going to play people tougher than people give them credit for. Now, does that mean they win? Not necessarily, but I think that's Notre Dame's 3rd game of the season. So, okay, we have maybe another tough win. Well, so if Wisconsin's a tough win and Michigan State's a tough win, we've got 2 tough games going into Purdue, which, again, Purdue should be an easy walkthrough, but sometimes Purdue likes to have those sneaky little games where they play teams tough and they have one upset of the year. So that could be Purdue's week. Who knows? Probably not. Again, it's probably going to be 45-7 Notre Dame. But then again, like you said, you got to give Notre Dame a little bit more credit this year because obviously you make schedules a couple years in advance. And, a couple years ago, this schedule could have been really tough because you look at Michigan State. Michigan State's supposed to be better than they were. Wisconsin, same thing with Wisconsin. Purdue and UNC, though. So we're looking, Notre Dame's probably 4-0, but they go at UNC. And that's Bill Belichick. So, that's enough said there where you really don't know what happens. Who knows? Maybe Bill Belichick finally flipped the switch, turned it around. You never know. Again, like you said, and like I'm saying right now, you have to give Notre Dame a little bit more credit for their schedule this season. Now, Stanford, yes, Stanford sucks. Okay, but Stanford is also a prestigious program. They've been good in the past. So, that should also be an easy win at home for Notre Dame. Then, like you mentioned, going to BYU. They had an argument to make the playoffs last year.
So the BYU game will be an interesting one mid-year for Notre Dame. See if they can kind of see where they're at, maybe gauge where BYU's at as well. But for Notre Dame, I think that they'll handle business and win that game, but just a good test on where they're at. Navy's had some decent teams in the last couple seasons, so maybe another good tough game for Notre Dame, but Notre Dame usually never really has a problem with Navy, so I think Notre Dame cruises through into the big one of the year for them, Miami, where we will really see how good Notre Dame is and if they can get revenge for last year, Miami and Texas A&M being the reason Notre Dame didn't get in. So I know Texas A&M this year, they'll have to just take it out on Miami. So Boston College should be a breeze. SMU also might be a tough fight for them. But again, I think Notre Dame is going to be extra locked in to making the playoffs this year. So, but you nevertheless could be a good game. SMU's got some money for their players. So, gonna have some guys. Can't go into that one sleeping. And then finally at Syracuse. Syracuse is going to be trying to play spoiler for Notre Dame. Syracuse has done that before in the ACC, just being a little menace to certain teams. So, but overall, I mean, I think with the playoffs new rule, Notre Dame shouldn't have any issue making it this year. And yeah, I think 11-1 is a realistic prediction. Of 10-2 would, I'd say, probably be their floor. If they go 9-3, I would have a hard time seeing them in the playoffs, even though we've seen 9-3 teams before. Just not being in a conference and having your own special rule, I feel like a 9-3 is not deserving of a special rule. So, but overall, yes, I think Notre Dame should have the easiest path to the playoffs of any team in college football this year. So,
all right, now moving on to the group of 6. So I want to talk about the group of 6 conferences and our playoff predictions for that. Of course, the playoff system still includes one group of 6 representative, one team that represents the group of 6 conferences, the lesser conferences, that being, the Mountain West, the CUSA, the American Athletic, as well as the Sun Belt, the Independents, the MAC, and also including the Pac-12 now, the Pac-12 that has been resurrected, but it now includes basically group of 6 schools that moved over. So the group of 6 or group of 7, I guess whichever you want to call them, still gets one team, at least one team goes to the playoff for the group of 6. Now, of course, based on what we saw last year, we have to say at least, because last year we saw 2 teams from the group of 6 make it to the playoff, that being Tulane out of the Athletic and James Madison out of the Sun Belt conferences. Of course, we saw them both get absolutely embarrassed on national TV for everyone to see. Basically just 2 playoff spots that just got wasted. I won't get into my personal feelings about the group of 6 playoff spot. I really think it's bad and we should get rid of it, and we shouldn't have it anyway, because there will never be a group of 6 team that's going to win this thing. Like, I'm not saying you have to win it, but you will never go far. It's never going to happen. So we've already seen with Boise State and Tulane and James Madison, none of them had a chance. So I don't get it, but of course we still have to include one of them. So with that being said, we saw 2 last year, thanks to some interesting things going on in the ACC. We talked about in the ACC episode how they tweaked the rules a little bit. They tweaked their tiebreaker rules. So their rules before allowed Duke, who was 7-5, to win their conference, and that ended up being why they missed out entirely, well, except for Miami. But that was a part of the reason why the group of 6 got 2 teams in, because the ACC champion did not make the field, based on their weird tiebreakers and Duke being 7-5, and basically the playoff committee picked 2 group of 6 teams over a 7-5 Duke. So very interesting and controversial way that it played out last season for the playoffs. This season, I think we'll be back to normal thanks to that ACC tweak of the tiebreaker rules. So I think we will only have one group of 6 representative from now on, which is one more than we need. One too many already. So let's talk about it. Now, I don't want to say usually, but it mixes from time to time. But some of the group of 6 teams have established themselves as kind of in the upper echelon of group of 6 teams. So those teams are basically Boise State, UNLV, Nevada, Las Vegas, Navy, San Diego State. You have James Madison. South Florida kind of came on the scene last year. They were looking good and then they fell off. But South Florida's usually like decent. Fresno State, Tulane, teams like that, right? Those are probably like the most consistent group of 6 teams, right? And then we also saw North Texas flirt with the playoff last year because they made it to the American Championship. And I believe they only lost 1 game in the regular season, so they were like 11-1. If they would have won that game, they would have made the playoff over Tulane, who ended up winning. So they were 1 win away from making the playoff. You have teams like Jacksonville State, who had a really good year last year. I believe they made their conference championship, and they become one of the better group of 6 teams ever since moving up from FCS. You have a new contender this year in North Dakota State, who just moved over from the FCS. So North Dakota State, that's a wild card right there. If they can continue the success they had at the FCS level, North Dakota State will be a force to be reckoned with as well when it comes to this group of 6 race. Tulane, we saw Tulane make the playoff last year, and Tulane has been consistent for the last several years now. Going back to that season where they beat USC in the Cotton Bowl, they've just been rolling ever since. So almost made the playoff 2 seasons ago, missed out, and then last season they did make the playoff. Now, of course, ran into the Ole Miss and then, got completely destroyed by Ole Miss, but, still was able to represent their school and, represent the group of 6. James Madison, the same school that produced Kurt Cignetti, the coach who now is at Indiana and just won a national championship. He started at James Madison, or I want to say started. I mean, he had a long career before that, but, he came from James Madison, came to Indiana, and James Madison did not fall off last season without him. Without Kurt Cignetti, they made the playoff. So James Madison just seems to be a really good program because even without, the best coach in college football right now, Mr. Kurt Cignetti, they were still able to make their playoffs, something that they did not do with Kurt. So shout out to James Madison. They seem to be running things in a group of 6 now down there in the Sun Belt. They're going to be a problem in the Sun Belt each and every season. All the other teams in the Sun Belt are going to be chasing James Madison. So definitely look to them to be back in the playoff race next year because they are one of the better group of 6 teams. They're actually one of the only group of 6 teams that I think can compete with like mid-level Power 5 teams, Power 4 teams. Like, because they did play Louisville last year and they lost to them, but it was a close loss and that was their only loss all year. They can compete with like mid-tier, low-tier Power 4 teams like that. Like they're going to beat like Purdue and Mississippi State maybe and, just bad teams like that are in the Power 4. So got to watch out for James Madison. East Carolina is interesting as well in the American. They went like 8-4, 9-3 last season. They made a little push at the end for the conference championship. They're always a pretty solid group of 6 teams, so watch out for the East Carolina Pirates in the race. The Memphis Tigers are always one of the better group of 6 teams. They are a very talented group of 6 teams. Sometimes they get like 4 stars and things over there, so they are always competing. Memphis lost a couple tough games last season that kept them out of their conference championship, so that's why they missed out, but they should be right back in the race this year. San Diego State, once again, one of the better group of 6 teams, have been for a while now. They've produced some good NFL talent over the years, and they're one of the teams that joined the Pac-12, so they moved over from the Mountain West to the Pac-12, so they're in a new conference, but basically just a new version of the Mountain West 2.0, so we'll see how they compete in a new conference. The Navy midshipmen it's tough because in the last few years, they've been really good, and they always seem to like just fall short of kind of being that group of 6 representative because they've done it the last couple seasons. They've been really good. They were undefeated like a couple seasons ago, like 9-0, 10-0 until they ran into Notre Dame and then everything fell apart. Navy's knocking on the door. So if the midshipmen can get their things together down there, Navy's going to mess around and make the playoff one of these years the way they've been playing these past couple seasons. So watch out for Navy. UNLV has come up to the top. They've risen to the top in the group of 6 conferences these past few years. They have made a name for themselves, got some good recruits over there, got a good coach that has elevated this program. So UNLV is now a premier group of 16, and they're still in the Mountain West. They did not leave to go to the Pac-12. So UNLV is probably going to be like the best team that's left in the Mountain West because all the other good teams like Boise State and San Diego State moved over to the Pac-12, Fresno State as well. So UNLV is probably going to be running the Mountain West now. Will it be enough to get them to the playoff? I don't know. They're going to have some, other conferences to deal with, but UNLV is going to be a force as well. And then Fresno State and Boise State both moving to the Pac-12. Both of these teams are were basically probably like the best overall teams in the Mountain West, I would say, like year after year after year. They are, I want to say like they're group of 6, but they're like dang near Power 4 teams that are in the group of 6, Fresno State and Boise State, just the success they've had, recruits they've gotten, NFL talent they've produced. So Boise State and Fresno State move over together in the Pac-12, and I would bet you that is the Pac-12 championship next season, if not for San Diego State San Diego State. So watch out for the Broncos of Boise State and of the Bulldogs of Fresno State. They will be pushing for that group of 6 playoff spot as well. So when it comes to my predictions are that the group of 6 representative will either be the Tulane Green Wave, once again, 2 years in a row in the playoff, or it will be Navy. I'm leaning towards those 2 teams. Now, the Pac-12 is very interesting, but I don't know how the Pac-12 is going to look in basically their first year back in a few years ever since they broke up. And of course, it's not the same Pac-12. It's different teams now. So we're going to see how they kind of battle it out. But, there are some Pac-12 teams to watch. Like I said, Boise State, San Diego State, Fresno State, maybe even a Washington State. But I think the American is still the premier group of 6 conference. The American seems to produce the best group of 6 teams year after year now. And the American includes Army, Tulane, Navy, Memphis, UTSA, East Carolina, South Florida, like all those teams, North Texas, who made it to the conference championship last year. All those teams are like in the top upper echelon of the group of 6, and that's just in one conference. So that's why the Americans seems to have taken the edge over the other group of 6 conferences. They've separated themselves a little bit just with the talent level and the production that they've been able to put together. So group of 6 race is going to be very interesting again this year. It's always like the weirdest spot because first of all, like they're all fighting just to be basically the team that gets embarrassed on live TV by a really good Power 4 school. So it's not like the playoff spot really matters anyway, like I kind of said earlier. But unlike the other playoff spots where it's basically given to one of the Power 4s, this is one playoff spot for 6 or 7 conferences. Like 7 conferences battling for one playoff spot. 7 whole conferences. So, anywhere from like 70 to 100 teams maybe battling for one spot. Which I feel like it kind of just, again, supports the point that this playoff spot doesn't matter when you have that many teams competing for one spot. But that's what a Group of 6 playoffs race is. And, it's very interesting for me to keep track of it. I'd be doing it during my Eliminator series and whatnot, keeping track of what Group of 6 teams are left for that playoff spot. So going to be very interesting to see again, and I can't wait to see what team ends up making it out and gets the honor of being the nail to the hammer in the first round of college football playoffs. So that will wrap up our Notre Dame and Group of 6 playoff predictions and preview. Thank you very much for watching the S&T Football Podcast. Please check us out, and we'll see you next time. Have a good one.